We actually just this past weekend did our second Ukrainian benefit concert. We have had two so far in San Francisco. We've raised $72,000 so far. I grew up playing piano since I was like 3 years old. I started playing bass when I was 8 or 9. For a second, I was thinking very seriously about going professionally for bass, classical music. But right now, it's just an amazing hobby that I have while I pursue my PhD. And for these concerts, we played music by Ukrainian composers and pianists, including Vladimir Horowitz. I got to play with some amazing opera singers and other musicians, and it was really amazing. I definitely think my music helps my research, helps me think broader, helps me think more creatively about problems. I also think that, when you're approaching a lot of these research problems, there's a lot of work that you need to put in the background. And it's a lot of steady, consistent, laborious work to build the foundation. And the same thing is true of performing a musical instrument. You have to just put in the hours of just like slowly perfecting each measure. So in terms of the discipline and the grind, I think that has definitely carried through. I think about both of them as kind of like almost like architecture, like you're building a big building, like brick by brick. You are putting together lines of code and functions that interact together and build towards something bigger and answer a fundamental research question, or you are composing motifs, putting together different developmental sections, trying to replicate a certain musical form, and together you can get, in both cases, you can get these larger works that I think like really try to answer some of these fundamental questions that we have as people. Before I entered my PhD program, I was working at the New York Times as a data scientist. I worked with a lot of journalists to help them analyze data for their pieces, find stories, find new sources, find more diverse sources than they had been using. But I realized as I was working that there was a lot of challenges that they had and a lot of open questions and ways of doing things that had been barely had any touch of technology to them. And meanwhile, we're in this crisis in the US where journalism is as expensive or getting more expensive as it ever used to be, and yet newspapers are bringing less and less revenue. So we're in a crisis where local news outlets are closing, every week or every month. About 50% of the counties in the US are known as news deserts. So they have 0 or 1 functioning newspapers. This is really bad for government on a local scale, for engaging citizens, for engaging the population. A lot of my research, what I realized when I was working in journalism was that some fundamental basic research questions, if we could answer them, we could go a long way towards addressing some of these problems, lowering the cost of doing journalism, helping journalists find more diverse sources, find more interesting stories, cover areas that they can't cover these days because the costs are so high. So that is what I tried to carry into my work. I tried to solve some of these problems, these basic problems like how can we find an interesting story in this court case or in this local city council meeting minute? And how can we do that automatically so that the journalist can just go in and with minimal effort write a really good story. Journalism is about humans communicating to humans. So at the end of the day, there always has to be a human there interpreting, speaking, putting a voice to things. It's an open question how many tasks we can facilitate to do basically like a machine in the loop kind of approach. So, for example, a journalist in the 1980s might have spent, all of their free time reading through all of these court cases to find the single one that would be interesting in the news story. Maybe we can have an AI crawl through thousands and thousands of court cases and surface the top 20 or 30 that might be interesting. Save the journalists a lot of time and make it possible for them to cover more. So I was working at the New York Times from 2014 to 2018. It was a crazy time. Of course, the Trump election was 2016. And it was a time of deep distrust, rising distrust in the media from the public, from our readers. The beginning of the time, 2014, when I was working, there was also a very scary time because the New York Times had just emerged from the red. There were goodbye parties almost every week for journalists that were being let off. You got to keep in mind the press in America has been battered over the past few decades, and especially the local outlets have suffered the most, and they've been forced to close. Almost every month there's another local outlet that closes. And so there was a real open question, at least at the times when I was working there, will we be able to provide the same coverage that we used to? With this rising distrust of media, we need to find new ways to engage readers. We need to speak more directly to readers' concerns. And for me, that means there's compelling research showing that readers are connecting with local issues. So they connect with a property tax increase in their neighborhood, or they connect with a mask mandate in their school. So there's all of these local issues that are incredibly important to tell to readers, but they're incredibly intensive. You need journalists to spend hours and hours and hours listening to these city council meeting minutes. And the reality is that we just don't have those journalists in America anymore. So there are all these untold stories that are not being found. So for example, when I was at the Times, one of the first things I did was take a look at our tip line. So the New York Times receives about 1,000 tips, on the order of thousands of tips a day. And that's a lot for journalists to go through. We do comb through everyone, but imagine if you had an AI that could predict which tips would be the most interesting. Then, as soon as the day begins, you have hundreds of tips in your inbox. You could say, these 10 are going to be the most interesting. A journalist should read them and pursue them right away. So we've defined kind of these notions of newsworthiness or interestingness, and we've built models to capture these qualities. We've then analyzed all of these corpora that journalists typically would spend hours and hours reading, like court cases, LA City Council meeting minutes, state-level laws. And we've tried to surface the most interesting ones so that journalists could look at them and not spend as much time going through them, going through the whole corpus. So for example, in LA, we applied our models and our algorithms to the City Council meeting minutes published by the County of LA. We found all of these super interesting discussions going on that hadn't been covered by the local press. We found one story about the City Council was prohibiting the use of federal funds to support soccer teams when there was pay inequity between the women's soccer team and the men's soccer team. Now, this is an issue that wasn't covered, but would be extremely impactful for the people in the neighborhoods that were involved. So it's stories like these that I hope we can find more of, do so in an easier and quicker way, and bring to journalists in a way that allows them to tell all of these untold stories. Another thing that we started to notice as we were studying the way readers interact with news and the information that they consume is that the voices inside the news article really matter. So the way journalists use sources or people that give them quotations really impacts how an article will connect with the readers. However, the problem that we suspect and that we're researching right now is that the types of voices that are being used are not representative of the country. They're almost often upper middle class white males from prestigious universities. And one of the central questions we've tried to ask is how can we meet the informational needs of a news article by using a more diverse set of sources? We've been looking at trying to define what the informational needs of an article are, we've been looking at trying to assess the diversity in news articles. And our goal here has been, can we diversify the voices in news? If we do that, we think we can help these stories connect to readers better. We can help them consume real news, as it were, to help them contextualize all of the information online, some of it fake news, some of it propaganda. There's two steps. First, we need to understand what information does this article need. For example, if it's a crime article, what we found is that crime articles tend to contain 2 or 3 quotes from police officers. They tend to contain 1 or 2 quotes from victims. There's usually a lawyer in there. There's some bystanders. What we are trying to do is to provide source databases and recommend sources for each story, so that maybe instead of talking to the white police officer all the time for that crime story, the journalist can have a recommendation for a black police officer or another minority police officer that could fill the role of that source in the story. What we are trying to do is to understand first, for every kind of reporting, we're trying to understand what their source requirements are. We're also trying to understand where do these sources come from. Can we build source databases that we can expose to journalists to give them these extra resources? And can we quantify diversity in a way that really helps us improve and diversify above what's being told? So let's say you're a journalist in the field and you're driving to cover a local crime story. We know that crime stories tend to use police officers and victims. With our databases that we are in the process of constructing, let's say we've scraped all of the voices out there on Twitter that may be victims. We have a local database of police officers. As you drive up to cover that story, our bot has already identified the possible bystanders that may have seen the event. We've already identified the police officers who might be involved in this event. We've already sent automated emails or tweets to all of them asking if they want to be quoted, if they want to talk to a journalist. So when you arrive at the scene, you already have in your inbox a list of bystanders that would like to talk to you and police officers that have seen or been involved with the event. This way, you can hit the ground running. You can get a story in a much shorter time, and all of the legwork of finding the possible sources, reaching out to them, making that contact, we've reduced it as much as possible. Imagine, too, that we've emailed you a set of these that have responded, making sure that this is the most diverse set possible. This is the most diverse set of bystanders that might have views that you wouldn't have ordinarily picked up if you were a journalist under deadline. When you're a journalist under deadline, you have to talk to whoever is nearest to you and whoever you are able to connect with in the quickest amount of time. This is often not the most diverse set of voices. So if we can do extra work to facilitate that process, we can expose the journalists to sources they wouldn't have ordinarily talked to, and we can help the news become more fair and balanced and representative of a broader cross-section of voices in the society. The AI that we're building is not just helping journalists do their job more efficiently, but we hope also helping them do it more fairly and cover voices they wouldn't ordinarily reach out to. I came to USC after starting my PhD at a different institution, and I left because the institution was incredibly constrictive, and I wasn't able to work on the problems that really matter to me. At ISI, I've been privileged to have access to some of the most brilliant minds as well as generous minds. I've had so much support. It seems like everyone's collaborating with everyone at ISI. It seems like everyone has time for everyone at ISI, which is so empowering as a young researcher to really have the confidence to pursue my own ideas and the support to flesh them out. I have, 3 co-advisors, which I couldn't even dream of that anywhere else, but just the willingness that professors have at ISI to support and engage with students has really helped me progress as a young researcher.